everyone. I'm happy to welcome my next guest, Aditya Kishore, Insight Director at WARC. He just got off the stage. He was presenting today at Imagination Day. It's the second day. And I would love to ask you some question, Adi. So basically, can you give a little bit of a recap of what the toolkit, the marketer's toolkit is, and how long has it been going on? Just a little bit for our audiences that are tuning in that perhaps couldn't see the presentation.
Sure. The Marketer's Toolkit is a very major study that WARC does. We've been doing it for 14 years. This is the 14th edition. It quite simply looks at five key trends that we think are going to have an impact in 2025. The kind of trends we look at are kind of more emerging trends. So we don't look at things that we would call kind of always on, like brand, performance, reach, frequency. These are basic marketing concepts and they'll always be true. We try to look at things that are kind of bubbling a little bit under the surface and just starting to take off, or something that's very new and is going to have implications for marketers, or even occasionally things that marketers are missing, an opportunity that is there and they're not identifying.
Exactly, because we're going to touch upon one trend that talks about an opportunity. Actually, it's one of my favorite trends that you are in the report. You probably know which one. But first, I'll start with the first. Trend. So, discount-driven strategies are big in Poland. We recently had a full-blown war of discounters. I don't know if you've heard, but basically it was all about it's Lidl and Biedronka for the ones who are wondering. So, our two big discounters in Poland, and basically the whole marketing campaign was screaming about prices and which one's the cheapest. So, my question to you is, how can marketeers effectively communicate value to consumers, especially when many consumers are still feeling financially constrained?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very significant trend worldwide, not just to Poland. Uh, we've seen, a pretty bad run of 5, 6 years since the lockdowns, then the war in Ukraine, inflation, interest rates going up. So most countries around the world, most consumers around the world are really feeling that pinch. Coming into the next year, we're sort of hoping that inflation kind of stabilizes, and the signs are generally very positive, even though some threats remain. But we're hoping that we start to see inflation stabilize. We've started to see interest rate cuts. So some money should filter down to the customers as we move forward, or at least things should be a little bit stable. The danger for marketers in these situations is, of course, that you cut prices, and as a result, you start to, that's the only way you can get customers. But that's in a sense a sort of self-defeating process, because all you do is assure sort of mutual destruction.
Exactly.
Everybody cuts their prices, and then it hits profitability, it hits growth, and you just create a new normal that makes it very difficult to function as a business. Now, it's important that brands understand that customers are hurting. It's important that they try to create, options that are as cost effective as possible. But discounting is generally not a long-term strategy and doesn't really work very well. So it's important to stress, as you pointed out, value. How can a brand be more valuable? And one thing we've definitely found is that there is a strong correlation between brand investment and the ability of a brand to maintain price premiums. So you can resist discounting, you can battle discounters if your brand is really powerful and you have spent time building the value of that brand. Couple of points in my presentation that I talked about. One is the data from Magic Numbers, which talks about for a 1% increase in price, what is the impact on your sales? How much do they go down? And the brands that have invested sizably in their brand, that have really built their brand, they go down by much less. So they're able to maintain more of a price premium. And the second is, of course, the case study
McCain.
from McCain's, the IPA case study, the one that won the IPA Effectiveness Grand Prix, because for 10 years, they have consistently had the same message and they have just hammered away on that. And they have built a brand that actually now is quite almost protected. It's never going to be 100%, but it is a stronger brand and it can help justify price premiums. And increasingly now, the discussion in the industry is that that is one important justification for brand investment, that you can defend a price premium.
Beautifully said. Completely agree. That's the point I wanted to call out to marketeers in Poland to read that trend in the toolkit and think about it, because what worries me is that we're seeing marketeers talking more about dropping prices and not investing in brand building. So completely agree. Adi, my second question. So now moving along to the second trend on closing the consumer experience gap. So with 3.7 trillion at risk due to poor customer experiences, how can marketeers expand their influence beyond traditional touch points? Because usually they stick to the website, the app that's mentioned, and improve the overall customer journey. Are there any standout examples of brands successfully aligning their promises with experiences? Because I think we've had some speakers yesterday and today talking about like thinking about their product, thinking about their brand, and thinking how that product or service is being, how does this, how do people kind of live with that product or experience? So how do they interact with it? So what would be your like? Do you have any standout examples of brands doing it successfully?
I think that the number one point here is actually to go back to some of the discussion we had around pricing, is that ultimately you can build a brand, you can invest in a brand, but the customer experience, about 60% of that value, according to Kantar research, is actually to do with your own interaction with the brand. So the brand makes you a promise, essentially, with the advertising, but if they don't deliver on it,
Then
then exactly, you're done. So it's very important to make sure that that happens. Now, you raised the point that marketers are not as well engaged with
which
pricing.
worries me. Yes.
Yeah. So it's been this again, links back to the first trend that over the last few years, marketers have become very focused on only one of the four marketing P's. They're focused on promotion, but there's also product, there's also price, and there's also place, and those things matter as well, because promotion, as you see from the customer experience gap, can't do it all.
Nope.
You have to have all of those things in place. So that's an important requirement. And the same advice I would give to get involved more with pricing is the same advice I would give to get more involved with customer experience. Own the customer data, really understand what drives customers, and then bring that to the boardroom and discuss that with your management. Because if you become the voice of the customer, you have credibility, you have weight in those discussions. So there are a number of brands that have been successful in improving their customer experience. I mean, HSBC is one that comes to mind because I was just looking at them. They had a big problem with their mortgage team. There were a whole bunch of the mortgage team were given these very sort of very specific kind of scripts and very tight kind of
Criteria.
requirements. And so when people were calling in, they were just trying to hustle them through and get them out as fast as possible. And that's a classic example of the Dorman fallacy, right? You're looking at efficiency and you're missing out on the good friction, which we talked about in the presentation. So they redid the entire program. They came in and they hired a consultant. They redid a lot of that. And they saw immediate results. So
Great
it's just
example.
that emphasis on don't lose out on the good friction.
Great comment. Completely agree. And then moving along to the third question. So this one is you probably the whole talk about AI. So obviously, in every kind of festival, in every type of conference, AI comes a lot. And what I loved about this trend is that we're so hyped and excited about AI, but are we thinking long term? And actually, what is AI doing in terms of sustainability? And I love that actually this was raised. I mean, some countries are probably leading in that space. I mean, I used to work in Netherlands, and I know that people in Netherlands are very much more aware of how they live, what they consume. The whole sustainability discussion is a lot more diverse. Here in Poland, I would say it's crawling, it's baby steps. So I mean, I haven't seen a lot of brands really tapping in sustainability, but this report basically is talking about thinking about what is this actually, what's the footprint of an AI. So given the environmental challenges posed by AI, do you foresee a growing emphasis on green and AI? Do you think marketeers are going to actually put that out in stakeholder meetings and say this is what we need to really think about?
I think it will be. I think it'll be uneven. I think there'll be parts of the world where that is stronger, and I think there'll be certain businesses which will face it more. But that is true of sustainability in general. I think AI will be no different. It'll be one more issue to discuss in terms of emissions and ESG targets and sustainability issues. But we are going crazy over AI. We are grabbing it
Yes.
everywhere if we can for every process. And I think we'll start to see some limitations of AI as well. Not every experiment is going to be successful. We'll start to see some shifts in that. But fundamentally, I don't see marketing or brands stepping away from AI. I think they're going to go ahead with it. And so, really, then it's a question of how do you manage that? How do you mitigate that as much as possible? And that's where I think you'll start to see scrutiny slowly ramp up. I don't think it's going to be sudden or immediate, but slowly, I think there will be more consideration of what kind of media platforms are you using, how are you selecting them, what kind of LLMs are you choosing, what's their energy source, things like that.
But do you think consumers are going to start pushing the companies to actually think about this, or do you think marketers should be ahead of consumers and actually have answers ready when it comes to?
I think definitely they need to start thinking about it because the by the time the scrutiny and the pressure comes, there is a cost to that.
Yes.
So try to get ahead. Now there are consumers who are concerned about the environment, and frankly, there are consumers who are not. But those who are going to be concerned about every single impact
True.
on the environment, and AI is not going to be different. It's just new, so people aren't focusing on that aspect of it yet, but it's begun and it will grow.
And last but not least, so this actually is my favorite. So, on the atomization trend. So, basically, with the rise of single person households, why do you think so many marketeers are overlooking this audience? Because that's when I read this trend, I was in awe because I completely agreed with the fact that it's overlooked, and we're so obsessed about looking at about other like specifically Gen Z audience. I don't know, baby boomer audience. That actually we haven't, that in these audiences there are people who are living alone, and it's a, I think Japan is a great example of a country that basically is catering to that idea of a single person, like this single restaurant, like a restaurant that you can go into Japan alone and eat and not feel, sad and pathetic. So why do you think marketeers are overlooking this trend?
It's a good question, and I don't honestly have an answer. I think we tend to, of course, be focused on very traditional segmentation. So we tend to look at, as you said, age cohorts, gender, race, sometimes ethnicity, region. Those are the things that we tend to look at. And so we're not creating that lens of a single person households. Like, what is your living environment? How are you living? Because there's another interesting trend, which we didn't talk about, but that's the rise of multi-generational households. So people are living on their own, but people are also moving back with their parents
True.
or having their parents move in with them. And that's much smaller. But it also has implications, particularly for CPG, FMCG kind of categories. So there's a little bit of movement. That nuclear family that we generally cater to is starting to reduce. It's still the majority, but it's starting to shift. So I think marketers just haven't caught on yet. They haven't started looking. The other thing that I think may be a factor, but maybe not so much, is this concern around the loneliness epidemic. The U.S. Surgeon General has talked about it, and he says there's physical ramifications to that. It's like smoking 15 cigarettes on your own a day. So I think that is something that I don't think that's what's constraining marketers, but I think they need to keep that in mind once they do go into the market, is to be very careful not to come across as exploitative. Now, alone doesn't mean lonely. Those are
True.
not the same things.
True.
And people are choosing to live more atomized lives. But there probably is quite a lot of overlap. And so marketers need to be a little bit careful. So this is not, I don't think this is a constraint so far, but moving forward, I think that is something that they need to be thinking about to make sure they don't come across as exploitative. That's the big.
I just wanted to basically mention that I was the loneliness epidemic. I think I read an article in New York Times that in New York there's so many single older people living in flats, and there's too little apartments available for students. That the whole idea, the city started thinking that perhaps we can match the lonely older people who have big flats with students that basically have small budgets, and kind of pair them up. So that was an interesting idea. I hope we can see more next year from cities, from brands, kind of thinking how can we cater to this challenge of loneliness, but also try and be empathetic about it, because to your point, it's just it's a choice. So we shouldn't make people feel sad about it. Thank you so much, Adi. This was wonderful. And yes, thank you, and let's enjoy the rest of the Imagination Day.
Thank you so much.